Miami's schedule for the upcoming season has been released. Has their fate already been decided before they play a single game? We'll break down why on today's Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat. Whether you're tuning in on YouTube, Odyssey, or your favorite podcast app, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg, editor at allyoucanheat.com, here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members, and today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply. The NBA released the season schedule on Thursday afternoon. The Miami Heat got a good break and a tough break within the first month of the season. We'll know a lot about this team by Thanksgiving, David. That's my major takeaway. I'll tell you why that is here in a second. But let's just start with some of the key dates, the big takeaways from the Heat schedule. Opening night for the Miami Heat, October 23rd versus the Orlando Magic at home at Kaseya Center.
Nice.
That's where it's all getting started. 4 of Miami's first 6 games are at home. The Heat, of course, started last year 1-4. So they're sort of behind the 8 ball, uphill climb in the standings from the jump. They cannot afford, we've talked about this before, can't afford another start like that. You don't want to say the season's over, after the first week of the season, but it obviously didn't help, especially for a team that ended up being in the play-in mix 2 years in a row. Like, all these games end up mattering at the end here. So having 5 of your first 6 games at home, I think, is a really big deal for the Heat. You also look at that stretch. The Magic, that's not a walkover anymore, right? Like, they won the division last year. They were in the playoffs. It's a very good team, but fortunately you get them at home, so that's a pretty good break. And then you're on the road in Charlotte. The next game, they stink. They're probably going to stink again. That should be a win. The Pistons in the third game of the season at home, they stink. That should be a walkover, but the Pistons, I think it was the third game of last season, it was the second or third game, pushed the Heat to the brink in that game. But again, a bad team. And then they play the Knicks and then the Wizards. So of the first 5 games there, 2 good opponents, 3 kind of lousy opponents, a softer schedule to start this thing, and they shouldn't, end up 1-4 to start this season.
It's a great point you made that we'll know a lot about this team because, we talked about the importance of the preseason. And I know some people even left comments questioning whether or not the preseason actually matters. And as we said at the time, you want to lay the foundation down for what you think the rest of the season will be. It's not necessarily a template in terms of wins and losses, but at least you want to set the emotional barometer. You want to set it at a high level so that kind of carries you through because you're constantly struggling throughout the regular season. Like, that's not just the Heat. That's every team in the NBA. You're dealing with injuries. You're dealing with travel. You're dealing with the grind of an 82-game season. All these different things kind of weigh on you. And so you want to at least start off fresh. You want to start off with some optimism. I've talked about it before. Like, 30 teams go into media day in mid-September, late September, excited and waiting and thinking they've got a chance at the title. And then soon enough, hopes will be dashed, but at least started off fresh. The Heat didn't even have that much. They came into the media day going, God damn, we didn't get Dame Lillard, So it started off really badly. Everything was a mess. Everybody was like, yeah, they were going to trade me, but I'm here now, so I guess I'll make the most of it. Kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it kind of carried over to the regular season. So now you've got at least a small cushion there to start off the year. Miami, again, if they start off the preseason with a good attitude, a renewed focus, and a sense of purpose with the rest of the season, I think it should carry through to those first games of the season. And that's just the break they'll need because I've got some concerns about the second half of the season. But we'll talk about that later on.
We will. We both kind of we've both pulled our most sort of important kind of make or break stretches from the schedule. And from talking with you before we started recording here, we have 2 very different stretches. So we'll get to those later on. But a couple more key dates here. Question for you, David. 2 of the games that jumped out to me, I always look for that first game against the Boston Celtics. That's going to be December 2nd in Boston. And then, of course, we've got November 18th at home against the Philadelphia 76ers. The 76ers, of course, are stacked now with Paul George and things like that. But it's also the return of Caleb Martin. Get your thank you videos, your tribute videos ready to go for that one. We know we'll see one there. But which one are you
Oh,
more
absolutely.
excited for? Are you more excited to see sort of that retooled, revamped Sixers squad at home in November, or are you more excited for the rematch against the Celtics on December 2nd?
The Sixers one. I think it'll have some emotional stakes there with Caleb. I think it's
Yeah.
interesting. Like the Celtics during the regular season, it's there's going to be some contention there. I can always see Celtics fans already flooding our mentions, kind of, trying to, at least my mentions. They'll be very vocal about their displeasure. But other than that, I think it doesn't really matter until the postseason anyway. It's welcoming Caleb back to the Kaseya Center, and all the fact that one, he left and it didn't work out for him quite the way he wanted to, and no one could have blamed him for it. That Miami offered him a great deal and he couldn't accept it because he thought there was more available in the free agency market, and just didn't work out.
Yep.
And also, personal feelings for us, as media members, always appreciated talking to Caleb. Always great to kind of get his perspective on things. He worked really hard, was a good contributor for a number of years here. So it's always, I think, kind of important to kind of see these guys as they reconnect and return to a team that kind of helped him establish the beginnings really of his NBA career, because he didn't really have much in terms of, like, I think his welcoming back here to Miami will mean more than whatever return he had to Charlotte, despite the fact his brother played there,
Oh yeah. No, I mean, he made his career in Miami, right? He became an NBA role player in Miami. And I don't get the sense from Heat fans that they're upset with Caleb Martin. This isn't LeBron James leaving in 2014. It was, hey, go get your money. You didn't really get your money. You kind of screwed up, but we're not mad at you for that. We kind of get it. And so whatever. But yeah, I think he'll be welcome back here. No doubt. I mean, we'll always remember the Eastern Conference Finals against the Boston Celtics. I mean, that's one of the all-time Heat role player series ever played. And so, yeah, I think it'll be a warm welcome, tribute videos and all. All right. Here's kind of the crux of things, and this is kind of the conversation that most fan bases will have online. It's a very online conversation to have. However, we'll have it here on the podcast. National TV games. So the Heat played 16 national TV games last season on TNT, ESPN, and ABC. It was like 23 or 24 if you include NBA TV. Not everybody gets NBA TV, so I don't include that sort of when I look at national TV appearances, even though for the press release, most teams will include NBA TV in their national TV appearance list. But I want, like, when I consider national TV, I consider, like, all right, am I getting the national broadcast? Because NBA TV just shows the local broadcast to whoever gets NBA TV. No, TNT, ESPN, ABC, they come with their own broadcast. They come with their own play-by-play, color commentary, the whole thing. So after 16 of those games last year, the Heat have just seven national TV games this year. And I haven't checked this because it's very hard to find, but I'm going to go ahead and guess this is the fewest amount of national TV games the Heat have had since Jimmy Butler signed in Miami in 2019. And so this is reminiscent of like those Dion Waiters, Hassan Whiteside kind of years. Like that's what we're kind of looking at here. Disrespected. What do you think? Is this about Miami kind of getting only 7 national TV games here?
I'm not surprised, and we talked about this again during the preseason and everything else. I think they've kind of earned this spot. They don't deserve to be on Christmas Day. They don't deserve to be one of the key games to kick off the season. They've earned this, and as a result, it's not a surprise. And I hope that they continue to use it as a motivation. That was my point when we talked about that brief part of the schedule that had been released last week. It's great to have that respect, but who cares? Like, honestly, at the same time, like, it doesn't matter. It shouldn't matter. Like, the team is in control of their destiny. It shouldn't matter if Doris Burke is on the sidelines to make them want to play better or not. And if they can kind of capitalize on what happened. Look, I mean, consider again the possibility that Jimmy Butler gets traded, whether it's midseason or at the end of the season. So, I mean, this team might already be dead in the water, and that's why they're not on national television. They were basically swept out of the playoffs. They didn't add any kind of key name in free agency, so there's no dynamic. Because basically, well, look at the same team we've kind of had on the roster, kind of had on the viewing slate for the last couple of seasons. They're not any more exciting than they were 2 years ago. There's no new wrinkle to this group. It's basically the same team, and as a result, like, why should they get any kind of national attention? I mean, they're not drawing any kind of peripheral fans by saying, hey, look at that. It's another 99-97 slaw against the Philadelphia 76ers or whoever, like, it's not like Miami's going to be putting up all these points or kind of radicalizing their offense to a huge degree. They're basically the team they've been. Khalil Ware might be a fine player and contributor, but he's not drawing names from, Oklahoma City or anywhere in the Midwest or anything like that, despite the fact that he played in Indiana, I guess. But I don't know. I'm fine with it, to be honest with you. And I think it's also, I'm a little surprised that they got as many as they did. I don't know that they would have gotten that. I don't think that they should have gone that much, because again, this is a team that a lot of people view as probably not even going to reach 44 wins, 42 wins. They might not even be
their
considered
FanDuel over under is 44.5, to your point, right? So
right. Yeah.
Look, I agree with you. 7 seems about right. That's about the right ballpark. You look at teams like the Pacers have 9, the Spurs, the Hawks, the Pelicans. All these teams have more national TV games than
the Hawks
Miami
is surprising to me, but maybe because they've got an early draft pick and they've got Trey, I guess.
I think that's what it is. It's Trae Young, but yeah, it's negligible is the difference here. But when was the last time the Spurs make sense because of Victor Wembanyama? But when was the last time the Heat had fewer national TV games than the Pacers, the Hawks, and the team from New Orleans? It is sort of a reflection of where it is that the Heat are now, which isn't necessarily a bad team. It's just not a team that is inspiring a whole lot of excitement right now from its own fan base and obviously from the national perspective as well. There's a 10-game stretch that could make or break the Heat season. I'll tell you what it is after this on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, the views from your seat feature, and their lowest price guarantee. All that and more. That's why Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying tickets for whatever event you're going to be looking for, whether it's Major League Baseball, WNBA games, concerts, theater, comedy shows, whatever you're looking for. Let's say you're in town, you're traveling for business, and then all of a sudden, hey, your meeting gets out a little early. You got a few hours to kill. Why don't you go look to see if maybe a ball club might be playing somewhere near there, or maybe you want to go catch a show or something like that. Go open up the Game Time app and you'll find the best prices right away. I love that. No guesswork, no worrying about there's any hidden fees or anything like that. You know exactly what you're going to pay for. You know exactly where you're going to sit, thanks to the views from your seat feature. So much to like about Game Time. So make sure that you save money and get the tickets you want for any event you could be thinking of. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the app today, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA. You get $20 off your first purchase. Terms do apply, but again, you create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA, and you get $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen of the day. For your second listen, enjoy the Locked On NBA podcast. There is no offseason in the NBA, and Locked On NBA provides daily basketball analysis from national and local experts in 30 minutes or less. No one keeps you as informed and entertained as Locked On NBA, available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So when the schedule comes out, David, I like to look for the stretch that's going to tell me the most about the team. What's like a 10-game stretch where I'm just going to learn what I need to know about the Miami Heat? And this time, it comes pretty early in the season. And this is the thing I was hinting at earlier. By Thanksgiving, we're going to know whether or not the Miami Heat are better than they were last season. By Thanksgiving, we're going to know if this team can compete at the top of the Eastern Conference. So after that initial home kind of heavy stretch to start the thing, the Heat play 10 games with a 6-game road trip in the middle of it. So the stretch I'm talking about is a 10-game stretch from November 4th to November 26th. I'm just going to read the games really quick. So it's at home against the Sacramento Kings, very good team that should be in the playoffs this year. And then they go on the road at Phoenix, at Denver, at Minnesota. So 3 teams who can conceivably win the Western Conference, right? Phoenix, a little bit more restocked and improved. Yeah, legit title contenders. Denver obviously won the championship 2 years ago. Minnesota, was in the conference finals last year. Anthony Edwards, the whole thing. Then you get a road game in Detroit. That's your one reprieve in the middle of this trip. Then 2 games at Indiana. The Pacers obviously were in the Eastern Conference Finals last year, a very good team. And then you come home finally after the 6-game trip. But who's welcoming you at home? Well, it's only the Philadelphia 76ers on the second night of a back-to-back after you've played the Pacers twice. You played the ramping up, high tempo Pacers twice in a weekend on the road, and then you got to come home and play Joel Embiid and Paul George and Tyrese Maxey at home on the second night of a back-to-back. So you play them, and then you get Dallas, and then you get Milwaukee, Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving, Giannis, Dame Lillard. It is 9 games against playoff teams. Several of those teams with a legitimate chance to win the championship this year. It is a barometer of all barometers. This Heat team that went 5-20 against teams with a top 10 point differential last season, right? Last season, the Heat built their record on beating bad teams, and they could not beat good teams. Well, there's a whole bunch of good teams on the schedule between the start of the season and by the time you're putting turkey on your plate for Thanksgiving. By then, we're going to know if the Heat are a good team or not. By then, we'll know. Yeah. And I think the win-loss part of it does matter. Like I said, like you've got to beat the good teams. You got to prove that you could beat the good teams. But it's going to be so interesting to watch this team again during that stretch and how they play, because we're like from the jump, this Heat team is going to have to take the regular season way more seriously than they did last year.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, it's no games off. Not even specifically about Jimmy. Just again, as a team, they've got to have a renewed focus to start the year, a sense of purpose. And I hope that Eric Spoelstra and the coaching staff, the mantra, and I think they repeat it to us a lot, but they probably just say it to the players as well. Maybe not as often or as ad nauseum, but it doesn't matter what your opponent is. You just one game at a time. It's like, screw all that. You don't have that luxury. You have to look at a bigger picture too. Sometimes it's good to kind of focus on those details, but sometimes you got to look bigger picture and go, look, if we don't win, 9 of our first 15 games, there's no coming back from that. And I mean, I'll save my point about the schedule stretch, and I'm worried about a little bit later. But it is a very tough schedule. It's not just going on the road. And you could say, oh, this team in the past has been really good, the Road Warriors, etc. This is going on the road to face contenders, playoff teams with varying styles. You get beat up one night when Nikola Jokic, 3 games later, you're trying to keep up with Tyrese Halliburton and the retooled Pacers. A lot of that's a playoff team. That's a really good team. Pacers I don't see any reason why they would take a big drop off or anything like that. So you've got to really figure it out. And then, you're coming home, as you said, and then you get that back-to-back against the Philadelphia 76ers, and then you have like 5 nights off after that because, you just went on this long road trip. It's like, couldn't you have spaced that out a little bit more? It's not even to incorporate. Well, I guess that's a Thanksgiving week. Is that basically what it is? But I mean, I don't even know if that's for Thanksgiving or not. But either way, that's just like you get all this time off, and then you might have lost 6 of the past 8 games. You might have lost 7, maybe like even 8 in a row. Like, that is a brutal stretch for this team.
And it kind of makes that home stand a little bit more important, right? Because those first 5 games, the first 5 games to start the season, Orlando, Charlotte, Detroit, New York, Washington, with only Charlotte being on the road. I put out on the Twitter poll on Locked On Heat, what's their record going to be after the first 5 games? 2 or 3 or worse, 3-2, 4-1, 5-0. 37% of you said 5-0, 30% of you said 4-1. 32% of you said 3-2, and it kind of feels like it has to be 4-1 or 5-0 to come out of that, because the first 3 games of that trip, Phoenix, Denver, Minnesota, that could be 0-3 easily.
Oh, easily. Denver, you never win,
but it feels like you got to win at least one of those games.
Yeah, which one? Phoenix?
I don't know. It's just
you never win at Denver. Yeah, like the last time they won in Denver was in the finals, right? So I mean, that was almost a fluke in itself. And then Minnesota, Jimmy hasn't won in Minnesota. Whatever, maybe that's just the fact that he hasn't played much against the Timberwolves in Minnesota.
Well, against those first 3 teams, they went 0-2, 0-2, and 0-2. They are 0-6 last season against Phoenix, Denver, and Minnesota. They don't play those teams well, to your point. So, but that 4th game on the road is Detroit. So if you could be 2-2 coming out of that stretch, split those Pacers games, and then you've got home Philadelphia, Dallas, Milwaukee. Maybe you can go 1-2, 2-1 in that stretch. That Philadelphia game is like a scheduled loss, man. Like that second night of back-to-back after playing the Pacers twice in one weekend. that's a scheduled loss. But then to your point, you get this little bit of a break from November 18th to November 24th. Can you split that Dallas-Milwaukee game? And then you're coming out of that trip at, 4-5 or whatever it was. So
no, see, I'm checking the schedule. I was right. November 28th is Thanksgiving Day. So they've got these 5 days off after the Philadelphia game to do nothing. And then they play 4 games. Yeah, they'll practice, but whatever. But I mean, they're going to be beat up. Who knows what their record will be? And then they've got these 4 games to close out November and sandwich the Thanksgiving holiday in between 2 of those games too.
Yeah, it's we're going to know by Thanksgiving if this team is good enough. We're just going to know. Like within the first month of the season, we're going to know exactly what this team is made of. But you have a different stretch that kind of jumped out to you from the schedule. We were talking about this before we started recording. You're a little pessimistic about what the end of the Heat schedule could look like. We're going to talk about that next here on Locked On Heat.
Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. You love sports. You're listening to this show. You love this so much. You never want them to stop, of course. But the playoffs, well, they're over. You get fewer games now. The sports are just not sportsing the way you want them to. But FanDuel, they let you keep the sports going whenever you want. And all you've got to do is open the app and you can dream up bets anytime you are in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers, new ones, old ones, whoever, with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. We'll be right back.
Thanks again for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. The best way to support the show is to hit that subscribe button, like the videos on YouTube. Also, follow us on your favorite podcast app. All right, David, what's the stretch that sticks out to you from the Heat schedule?
It was actually the stretch afterwards because I was looking at his schedule and I always try to figure out how many home games, road games, etc. when the schedule comes out. And you look at March, and March really is an interesting one because they have, 16 total games, 17 total games, 12 of which are at home. And you think to yourself, this is great. This is great. They've got all these home games. It's a nice way, especially to close out the end of the season, make a last season push. But then I'm thinking to myself, what have we learned about this team? It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether these games are on the road or at home. And they haven't necessarily had a great winning record at home. Yeah, they've won a little bit more. I mean, you're supposed to. Even bad teams win at home more often than they do on the road. But this Heat team isn't necessarily getting this huge cushion. It's not like you look at those 12 games on the schedule, regardless of opponent, and go, yeah, that's 12-0, baby. No, not with this group. So I started looking before that, and then I looked at February. And February, again, you're coming off that really brutal November. You've got some kind of wiggle room in December. You got a good mix of road games, home games, a couple good opponents, a couple bad opponents. And you've got the in-season tournament during the December. And then January, you got 3 games at home against the Pelicans, the Pacers, and Utah. So Utah may be the only cakewalk there. And then you've got another 6-game road trip against the Sacramento Kings, Golden State Warriors, the Jazz again, the Blazers, who knows if you can beat them, and the Clippers and the Lakers. So you've got that 2 games in Los Angeles. And then Denver back at home. So again, thanks for being on the road for 6 games. Come on home and welcome back to the Denver Nuggets and Nikola Jokic, the best player in the world, who you can't stop and you can't guard. And hopefully, you catch him on a bad night. My concern is you've got these games, and again, it's kind of tying it all together. The sense that you have to really have a laser-like focus, that there has to be a sense of purpose with each of these games as you play them, because by January here, you could have this really, really tough stretch. And then you look at February, and it's no better. You've got another 5-game road trip to start off the month of February. You come home, you got Boston, and then you got 2 games after that against Oklahoma City and Dallas on the road. And then the All-Star break. And February, you look at those terrible games to start off the month of February. If you haven't made the most, and again, have a really winning record to kind of provide that cushion, and if you can't win out most of your games in January and you start off February with that, I think this could be a team on the brink of collapse. And I know that sounds fatalistic, and it also sounds completely atypical of the general optimism I've had about this group. but you could start off February with a really tough stretch there on the road. And it could be the mounting of this tension. If you don't win November, if you don't win December, you don't come up with you can't dig yourself too deep a hole over the course of the first few months of the season and then look to that cushion, theoretical cushion of those home games in March to save your season, because that's not going to work. And I think if they don't have, again, a sense of purpose, a positivity about this group, if it just feels like the same, and you know what I'm talking about, like we've been in that locker room, we know when the team is just not, like they might have a personal camaraderie with one another, but that doesn't necessarily make them a joyous and kind of happy group. That's
Right.
just they've been kind of tired. They've been kind of like tired of each other.
Immaculate, or are they not, right? Or are they stale? And
that counts.
Yeah,
And if
counts.
by February the vibes are not good and you're losing, and then you're saying to yourself, yeah, we've got that cushion at home, but that might not necessarily mean anything. They might not even care. By that point, you're leading up to the trade deadline and the All-Star game, and you might be like, you know what?
Right.
It's time to hit the red button early on, and kind of see, we might just not make it. And now, while this team doesn't generally operate that way, it might just be at that point. You might be able, I don't know, again, trade Jimmy Butler at that point. It's not.
I mean, to your point though, I mean, it's awesome to have this home heavy stretch. Like there's a glass half empty and there's a glass half full version of this, right?
Sure.
But the half glass full version of this is, oh, well, we got a bunch of home games for the playoff push, right? Like this, if we're in the mix for that play-in mix, maybe this is the stretch where we kind of get up into that top 6 in the Eastern Conference. The glass half empty version is, well, there's 41 home games and there's 41 road games. So if you get a bunch of home games at the end of this thing, sandbagged at the end of your schedule, that means you got a bunch of road games to start. And we already mentioned that 6-game road trip to start, basically at the very beginning of the season, there is a potential here for you to be so backwards on the schedule where you're always just facing an uphill climb, the way that we saw last year, where this team just always felt like they were trying for the longest time, just trying to get above 500, right?
Yep.
And that, I think, it contributed to some of the sour vibes that we were picking up on in that locker room. And if that's what you're dealing with, then it might not matter by March that you have all these home games sandbagged at the end, because you might already be out of it. Maybe not even by your record, but maybe mentally you're out of it, because we just also have not seen teams stay together this long and not win a championship, right?
Yeah.
Or rather, let me rephrase that. We haven't seen teams that have not won a championship stay together this long. Which is probably the better way to phrase that. And there's a reason for that, and a big reason for that. You think about those Clippers with like Chris Paul, Blake Griffin, DeAndre Jordan. There's an expiration date on this stuff. It's just like you look around, the locker room eventually looks around and says, this clearly ain't working. Something's got to give. And I'm not saying that the Heat are going to do that. They're not going to just, this is not a team that's going to throw in the towel, but you don't necessarily have to your point earlier. Like there's a difference between immaculate vibes and teams that are kind of feeling themselves and riding a wave, and teams that are just sort of always fighting to kind of get out of the mud. And it's exhausting. And I don't know that this team can afford exhausting again, as exhausting as last season was, and obviously the year before that when they went to the finals.
Credit to the group that they've been able to kind of stay together despite all of that. Like, I mean, that's a really good point. Normally those tensions, again, I mean, it's a workroom environment, it's a working environment. People you get frustrated with coworkers. It's bound to happen. And so you would think that, tensions would blow up and there'd be a public scene. And you've had your moments over the course of the past 5 seasons of Jimmy Butler's tenure here. But all in all, it's been mostly positive, and certainly mostly positive on the public side. But you have to wonder whether or not things could finally come to a point where, let's say they go through another injury bug too. And then you've got all these games on the road, and you're looking maybe to bring back these players by March. He's like, oh, we're going to have that homestand in March, or most of our games in March at home, so we can kind of ease their players in there. It's like, again, by that point, it might not matter. You can't afford to necessarily take those chances and wait for this pot of gold at the end of the rainbow, because that rainbow, there might not be any bright colors there to kind of carry you through February. You might be, it might be a really tough stretch for this group. So it's interesting. And I know we're kind of being speculative here, and this isn't just like filling the time over the offseason or anything like that. I mean, you have to look at these things and understand we have no idea what this group is going to be like, but you can kind of look ahead and say, if they're not having that sense of purpose and the positivity that we feel they need, that we felt they did not have to start last season, and if they start experiencing the injuries, the nicks, the bruises, the tensions that come with the course of a regular NBA season, it could all be
Well, and
building up to a really bad end.
to your point, this is after the trade deadline. If
Yeah.
this team is under 500 by the trade deadline and does decide to do something dramatic, then a bunch of these home games at the end don't even matter. If you're kind of you take a calculated step
Right.
back in February, then having all these home games in March, it's not going to count for much other than seeing some of the new players on the roster. I guess I don't know.
Cash
yeah,
considerations is going to be suiting up for those home games. You know what I'm saying?
That said, I think you and I do have a little bit more of an optimistic view of the Heat this season, based on where they were last season. I just this start, like the start of the schedule, is going to just tell us so much. So it does feel like both of the stretches that both you and I kind of pulled out of the schedule here are related in that way, right? So if they do sink rather than swim in that stretch that I pointed out within the first month of the season, then that could set up the kind of glass half empty scenario that you're talking about potentially happening at the end of the season. And so fascinating stuff. Again, October 23rd is opening night against the Orlando Magic. A nice stretch to start the season, and then the make or break stretch of the season potentially here. I'm excited, man. I usually don't get like ramped.
Too.
I don't get like this excited about NBA or schedule releases in general, but this time I kind of am. I'm feeling like I'm ready for basketball to be back.
Oh no, of that
I only have 2 months to go,
no
but
yeah. I know people are like, "Oh, it's right around the corner." It's like, no, not really.
It's not even close to being around the corner. It's kind of silly. I know that the NBA does this because they want to have like some sort of landmark event every month of the year. That's their way of occupying the calendar. It does feel a little silly to have the schedule come out 2 months before the season starts, but what else are you going to do, I guess?
It feels like the league itself is kind of like retooled or re-energized. And I mean, we kind of spoke to this last season, and as good as the Celtics were, and you know, their regular season and their postseason certainly reflected that. Like there still is, I think, an overwhelming sense of parity. And you look around the league, and there are a lot of teams that feel like they could be contenders, that are like you know, legitimate, you know, and the kind of conversation for a title. And so that just kind of renews and refuels all the different narratives and stories about everything. And it's just, I'm looking forward to seeing what these teams look like when they play each other. And of course, I'm looking forward to seeing what this Heat team do. I think it could be tough. Like, we're making it sound maybe a little too doom and gloom, and I don't want that to be the case. We're saying that's a potential possibility. At the same time, if it doesn't work out that way, this group is just really good from the start, and kind of just, you know what, we're looking, Terry Rozier is great. Tyler is all of a sudden this dynamic three-point shooter. Jimmy has this renewed sense of purpose with this team. It could be really fun. Like, we could be talking about the Heat.
That's the other
as
option
one
of
these
this,
teams.
right? Like within the first month of the season, we'll be like, oh my God, this team that couldn't beat a good team last year is just blowing, like they're 15-5 after the first 20 games. This is crazy. Like there's potential there. And the Heat do believe that there is a championship contender in that locker room.
Yeah.
But now they have a chance to show it, and they have a chance to show it early. And that's the makings of a very exciting, at least, start of the season. So we'll see what happens. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. Like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. Follow us on your favorite podcast app.